Serious, what is something that happened in your childhood that you only realized the gravity of when you were an adult? The trauma of being tied to a tree for hours because my mentally ill mother didn't feel like dealing with me. For days on end, helping dad strip copper. It was a fun chore we didn't get to do often. We were more poor than I may have realized. We used to go visit this woman at the hospital once in a while. I remember she was very pretty but very cold. And sometimes they'd say I wasn't allowed in and one of my siblings would wait outside on the parking lot with me. We were visiting my mother in the psychiatric hospital. One night I woke up to hear my mom downstairs calling for help. I went down and saw she'd fallen over the chair and knocked it over. And she couldn't get up. So I called 911. They came and got her and took her to the hospital. Several years later, now that I was a little older, she asked me if I remembered that night. It was kinda hazy, but yes, she told me I'd saved her life. And I kinda scoffed and said you just fell or something. It wasn't that bad. She'd overdosed on some sort of meds. It was a suicide attempt. I was molested by my trainer in hockey in the dressing room in front of about 4 or 5 other kids, and as a kid I thought I did something wrong and I was going to get in trouble or kicked off the hockey team. It really fucked with my head for a while. I'm only finally dealing with it now at age 37. I was 12. Lots and lots of therapy is helping. I think. The cancer I had when I was a toddler. As a kid I was just used to going to hospitals a lot and didn't think much of it. Being bald for a time was weird, but I got over that. Wasn't until I was much older that I really started to realize exactly what it was that happened to me. I was pretty upset when my family moved out of our house like 10 miles away to a worse area further from my school and my friends. A few years ago, I thought about it and realized it happened late 2008, early 2009. Finally connected the dots that the housing crisis hit my parents hard and we needed a cheaper place. My dad would lock me in the basement overnight or leave me in foreign places and drive off. I just figured it was normal parenting until I saw the look on my therapist's face. Lol. My older sister's drug addiction. I was always so accustomed to it being my reality, that once I began really understanding it as an adult I felt like I grieved for my sister all over again. A friend of my parents' young, like 5 or 6 daughter asked me to tickle her mini and pointed her bum in the air in my direction. At the time I just thought it was incredibly weird and I awkwardly got up and left the room. But looking back as an adult I'm really concerned about possible abuse. My sister came home sobbing one day when I was 6. I didn't understand what happened. I realized later on my memory of going to the hospital and my mom correcting my pronunciation, which I then repeated a million times, were related. My sister had a stillborn boy and barely survived herself. She'd never carry another child to term. I was thinking about this the other day. I remember being little and visiting my grandmother's house and she asked what I wanted for dinner. I wanted my favorite meal. Canned condensed cream of chicken soup. Not even mixed with anything. Just still condensed and pudding consistency. Oh, and room temp. That's how I liked it. My grandmother was upset by this. I didn't understand why. It was my favorite meal. I had it all the time. At that time we were living off WIC/food stamps. Didn't have any appliances, no fridge, stove, or microwave. We could only eat canned food. Straight out the can. BC no bowls either. Couldn't add the recommended can of milk or water to my condensed cream of chicken soup. BC no milk and no running water. But it's like I didn't even know what was wrong with that situation. The dude who supplied LSD to the Grateful Dead was named Owsley Stanley. He was an eccentric dude with a lot of obsessive interests, which is how he got to be the Dead's manager and sound mixer. One of this dude's obsessive compulsions was diet. He had ideas about the way people ate and what was natural. And he eventually got to the point where he would just boil chickens down to their broth and just eat that every day. A kind of chicken soup protein shake for breakfast, lunch and dinner. So you weren't the only person out there who enjoyed eating plain warm chicken stock. There was also Owsley Stanley, the manager and LSD supplier to the Grateful Dead. When I was 12 I was clearing some overgrow on a wet hillside when I slipped and tried to stop my sliding by putting my hands down. A rock sliced my wrist down my arm and just missed my artery. I was 45 minutes from the nearest hospital and an ambulance wasn't an option. I had to get 7 stitches down my wrist. Had it been 4 millimeters to the right I would have bleed out in minutes. When I was little I had 3 sets of grandparents and one day one of my grandfathers just disappeared. No one said anything about it and it was like he never existed. When I got a little older I found out that my mother's parents split and got remarried when my mother was still a child herself. The grandfather in question was my mother's stepfather. I only have one memory of him sitting in a chair. And when I was a teenager I asked my mother what had happened to him. She refused to talk about it. And I didn't press it. Over time and through different relatives I learned what had happened and it was horrifying. Trigger warning. The next paragraph contains sexual assault. Apparently when my grandmother remarried, it was to a piece of shit human being. My mother's stepfather molested and raped his own daughter and his 3 stepdaughters. This went on until each of the 4 girls moved out between 15 and 19 years old. My grandmother wasn't aware of what had happened and either figured it out or was told years later. When she found out she tried to kill him by shooting him in the crotch repeatedly. Sadly, she wasn't a good shot. but she did manage to shoot him in the stomach and leg. He did live and she was arrested for a short period. A week or so from what I gathered. My grandfather wanted her arrested and charged, but the police told him that he would go to prison with her if he didn't drop it and move out. He decided that was a good deal and moved after he was released from the hospital. Grandma was released without any charges, but her guns were taken away. I never saw him again and I never heard anything more about what happened to him until he died a few years ago and my aunt asked me to go to his funeral. My grandmother full arm slapped me across the face, knocking me off the chair because I didn't want to try hot dish for dinner. I was 6 or 7. My grandfather did the same to me because I stuck my tongue out at him. I was closer to 4 or 5. And this is one of my earliest memories. My mom packed up me and my brother and left immediately. The weird thing is I'm in my 30s now and he's always been the closest thing to a positive male role model I've had on either side of my family. Not to make excuses, but he's a genuinely good guy. It was more a product of what he knew. To my knowledge, he's never done that to any of his other grandkids. He has a gaggle and I'm one of the couple oldest. Not nearly as bad as some of the things I'm reading in this thread, but it definitely had a lasting negative impact on my psyche. Some repressed memories come back as I get older. I remember saving the lives of some kittens when I was young who had frozen solid outside in our shed. My parents found out I was nurturing them and forced me to put them back in the shed to freeze to death, then clean their decayed bodies off the furniture when the temperature got warmer. Explains why I've gone to extremes to take care of cats I've seen around with injuries, and why separating from any cats after taking care of them causes me to instantly start shaking/trembling and cry. Oh my gosh, this isn't your sin, it is theirs. You were a child. No one ever would hold what happened against you. Those kittens knew love, the love you gave them before they died. Not only will you get in heaven for all the good you've done, but they will be there to welcome you. I saw a cartoon once. An old man is at the pearly gates. God is standing there with a little dog wagging his tail and said, "Are you little Billy? Buddy here has been telling me all about you." That's what I see. Those kittens. No, strike that. All the kittens and cats you have loved. All this time telling God how great caffeine_fiend4 is as a person. When I was 11 and my sister was 16, her ex-boyfriend, they broke up 2 years before this, flashed me when we were alone. I thought it was funny and told my sister. I then remember that we didn't see him again for a while. I later found out that he wanted to sexually assault me to get back at my sister for leaving, and that my sister told our aunt, who told another victim's parents. My parents planned a trip to Disney World when I was 7. My dad paid for the trip. A month or so before we were to go, my mom decided they were getting a divorce. My mom still took my sister and I on the trip to Disney that my dad paid for, where we met a man that she had met online, and his wife that my mom didn't know about. I don't know if that was her plan the whole time they planned Disney, or when she started talking to this man, or why she thought it was smart to take a 7 and 10-year-old to meet some strange man off the internet. My cousin did kind of the same thing. She was cheating on her husband of 13 years, having 5 kids but never being happy, very materialistic and trying to fill the void by having kids she never took care of. Her husband found out. She didn't care. Around 8 to 9 months after finding out, she finally said she wanted a divorce, but they had planned a trip to Disney World. They went to Disney World with their 5 kids, my aunt and uncle, and their exchange students, which they got even after everyone knew my cousin was cheating, which makes me feel bad about the exchange students since they are both living in different houses currently. Anyway, they went to Disney World where my cousin and her husband started to argue about some stupid shit in front of everyone when finally my cousin said she already filed for divorce. Everyone started crying. Her now ex-husband, her kids, ESP the older ones, and the exchange students. My cousin's exchange student did not want to go back with them. This all happened in 2021. The Disney World trip was last month. So yeah, a shit show. Your story reminded me of my cousin. When I was a kid, my mom packed me and my brother up and we drove across the US, camping out across the way. When we reached the other side of the country, we lived in this guy's garage for a bit. I was sometimes allowed to sleep inside, then some pretty infested homes. Only years later did I realize, 1, we were homeless and she was unstable too, because of how abusive she was. Our moving around a lot was probably her running from CPS, but then, what an adventure. I would stay at my best friend's house all the time when we were little. One night she insisted that I take the bed and she sleep on the floor, which was opposite what we normally did. She slept blocking the door. I remember waking up to her telling her father no and shutting then locking the door. I didn't think anything of it and fell back asleep. A few years later it came out that he was sexually abusing all 3 girls. It wasn't until a few years ago that it finally clicked that he had been trying to get to both of us that night and that she had taken the floor to prevent the abuse. Still fucks me up to think about. My mother, lying in bed, rubbing her hands together as she was crying. I was 10 or 11 and she said she was okay. But much later I realized how stressed and sad she was that my dad was stationed in the Middle East. She never showed anything up front, but suffered internally and away from us. I found some adult pictures of my parents and other couples when I was a kid. Found out a couple months ago that my older brother is actually my half-brother. I grew up in a small town, like a zero stoplight. Population 300, small town. We lived on the main street right across the street from my grandparents. Next to them is a tiny little bar. I remember one day in the summertime me and my female cousins were out in my grandparents' side yard playing. The side yard butted against the side of the bar. I think my parents and some aunts and uncles had been cooking out and drinking at my grandparents' house that day, and the bar had been busy. A lady came out of the bar while our family was inside and started talking to us. I don't remember what she said to us, but she seemed interested in what we were doing, what we were playing, etc. Next thing I know, my mom comes flying out of the house flipping out on this lady. Normally I was used to my mom causing a scene when drunk, but the family seemed to be backing her on this one, which seemed odd. There was a lot of verbal back and forth and eventually ended in my family and some other people in town basically telling this lady and her husband to get the fuck out of there, go home, telling them they weren't even wanted in the town. I was way too young to realize what was going on at the time, but a couple years later I found out the lady was married to a convicted sex offender. She'd had all her kids, daughters, taken away because he was molesting the girls. When I asked my mom if she knew what the lady said to us, she said my cousins had told her that the lady was basically trying to convince us we should meet her husband and come to their house because she had daughters and toys we would like. She'd waited until the adults were all inside to come talk to us because she knew what she was doing and knew if she got caught there would be trouble. I used to get in trouble a lot for leaving the yard alone and wandering around town without telling my parents. After I realized what my mom was saying about people wanting to hurt me, she showed me where the guy lived and what he drove. I never even got within 2 blocks of that part of town. I remember walking to a friend's house and seeing his car coming, and I hid in some bushes. I was so scared of him and his wife. When I was in grade 4, I was living with my mom, brother, sister, my mom's friend and her daughter in a 3-bedroom house we rented. Money would be really tight, and out of nowhere they would come home with boxes of food. They told us they went to a really cheap store. Wasn't until years later I found out the store they wouldn't tell us the name of was the food bank. Also, when Christmas came around, I noticed I was getting some weird presents. Like the person getting them didn't know me well. Turns out my mom was using one of those toy drives. As a kid, my brother and I always had a bit of a sibling rivalry going. Sometimes my brother would put me in a storage tote and sit on the lid so I couldn't get out. And it wasn't until I went in for a CT scan as an adult that I realized that being locked in tight spaces as a child caused me to be claustrophobic as an adult. When I go in for a CT scan, I have to have my glasses off and my eyes covered with a washcloth, otherwise I'll have a panic attack during the scan. Me mum's ex-boyfriend was a psycho and tried to run her over. I had to grab her and pull her back, otherwise he would have hit her. On our walk back, we had to hide in bushes whenever we saw a car's headlight just in case it was him. Ended up calling his brother, who calmed him down. Really only hit me a couple of years back. That was fucked up. As a child I was pretty meh about everything going on around me. My parents had me at 14. I remember being in 6th grade and all the kids at school gawking at the fact that my mom was 28. I never thought anything of it because my mom's #1 goal was to make sure I never felt like the product of a teen pregnancy, and damn, she succeeded.